Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a world of white gloves, country club luncheons and household budgets managed with the quiet precision of a military operation. We're talking about 1950s America, specifically what life really looked like for the wealthy housewife who presided over it all. The woman who floated through sun-drenched rooms in cashmere and pearls, organized dinner parties with the discipline of a general, and smiled graciously at everyone who walked through her front door, even when she was quietly exhausted beneath it all. Before we go any further, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if this particular corner of the internet where history and nostalgia quietly hold hands at a well-set table feels like home to you, and a genuinely warm thank you to the viewer who suggested this topic. You always send the most thoughtful ideas, and this one has been on my mind ever since it arrived. It is exactly the kind of story that deserves to be told slowly and with care. The channel is also now on Spotify, so if you prefer to listen while you fold laundry or drift off at night, you can find the link in the description below. Now go ahead and dim the lights, put on a fan if that helps you settle, pull your blanket a little closer and make yourself genuinely comfortable, because we are going to take our time with this one. Have you ever wondered what a Tuesday morning actually felt like in a wealthy household in 1954? What did the breakfast table look like when no one was watching? What did it smell like when the housekeeper polished the silver in the back room and the coffee had just finished percolating? What did a rich woman actually do with the hours between 9 in the morning and when her husband came home? Did she rest? Did she work quietly behind the scenes in ways no one ever thought to record? Did she feel the weight of expectation pressing softly but constantly against everything she did? And more importantly, what did it cost her to keep it all looking effortless? And just like that, it is 1953. The gardener arrived an hour ago, and the roses along the front walk have already been trimmed. Somewhere in the kitchen, the housekeeper's making a list. The silver needs polishing. The linen needs pressing. And you, in your robe at the vanity mirror with your coffee cooling on the tray beside you, are already thinking about everything that needs to happen before dinner. The day has barely begun. But in a wealthy household in 1950s America, it was never really not already begun. Let us start at the very beginning of the day, before the household fully stirs, before anyone arrives, before the lists are made and the schedules are set. It is early morning in a well-appointed bedroom somewhere in the better part of town, a suburb of Boston or Cincinnati or Pasadena, and the light coming through the curtains is soft and golden and entirely unaware of how much is already expected of you. You're a wealthy American housewife in the 1950s, and even the first minutes of your morning carry a kind of quiet structure that most people would not immediately recognize as work. The room around you is beautiful, genuinely beautiful, with its upholstered headboard and its matching nightstands, and the faint scent of the powder you applied last night still lingering on the air. You do not leap out of bed. That is not how mornings work here. You lie still for a moment, listening to the house settle around you. The faint creak of a floorboard somewhere below, where the housekeeper has already let herself in, the distant sound of birds in the elm outside the window, the soft sound of your husband breathing beside you or already gone, depending on the day. There is a specific quality to the silence of a well-kept house in the early morning, a kind of held breath, a pause before the day declares itself. You have lived inside that silence long enough to know its texture, and for a few minutes you let yourself simply belong to it. Then you rise and the day begins in earnest. Your robe is on the chair where it always is, heavy silk, a gift from 2 Christmases ago. The kind of thing that would have felt extravagant before you were married, and now feels simply correct. You wrap it around you and move to the vanity, because the vanity is where the morning ritual properly begins. The mirror is large and well lit, framed with the detail that catches the morning light in a way that still pleases you after all these years. You sit down, and the reflection that greets you is familiar and private. The face you have before the day requires anything of it. You allow yourself a moment with that face before you begin the work of preparing it for everything that comes next. Cold cream first, the same kind your mother used, applied in slow circles the way the magazine suggested years ago, and which you have done without thinking ever since. Then toner, patted gently with a cotton square. Then the careful application of foundation, powder, a particular shade of lipstick that suits the morning without being too much for 9 o'clock. Your hair was set the day before, and you smooth it now with practiced hands, securing a pin where needed, checking the line of it from the side. The whole process takes perhaps 30 minutes, and it is never hurried, because a woman of your position does not present herself to her household or to her day in a way that suggests she was rushed. There is something meditative about this ritual that you have never quite been able to explain to anyone who has asked. It is not vanity, or not only that. It is a form of preparation, the way a musician might warm up before a performance, a gradual alignment of self with the demands of the hours ahead. By the time you finish, something has settled in you. The day feels manageable in a way it did not quite feel 10 minutes before. You dress carefully, even for a morning at home. A shirtwaist dress in a soft print belted neatly, stockings, low heels appropriate for a day that will not leave the house until mid-morning. In the 1950s, the idea of receiving your housekeeper or your neighbour at the door in anything less than fully dressed would have felt genuinely wrong to you, a lapse in the particular form of respect that a well-run household demanded of its mistress. Getting dressed properly was not performance. It was standard. The way making the bed was standard. The way the breakfast table being set before anyone sat down was standard. The children's rooms are quiet still. You pass their doors on the way to the stairs and pause for a moment outside each one, listening the way mothers do for the sound of ordinary sleep. Satisfied, you continue down the staircase, one hand light on the banister, your heels quiet on the carpeted steps. The kitchen is already warm. The housekeeper has the coffee on, and the orange juice squeezed and waiting in the good glass pitcher, and the smell of it all, coffee and citrus and the faint warmth of something beginning to toast, is one of the genuinely uncomplicated pleasures of your mornings. You pour your coffee and stand at the kitchen window for a moment, looking out at the back garden in the early light. The roses along the fence are holding their colour well this week. You make a note to cut some for the dining room table. Then you set down your cup, pick up the small notebook you keep on the kitchen counter, and begin writing the list for the day. The morning has officially begun, and somewhere in the house behind you a child stirs, a door opens softly, and the quiet gives way, gently and completely, to everything the day intends to ask of you. It is not yet 8 o'clock, and already there is a knock at the back door, soft and practical. The sound of someone who's been doing this long enough to know exactly when to arrive. Your housekeeper is here, and the quiet negotiations of the household day are about to begin. In a prosperous home in 1950 America, domestic staff were not a luxury reserved for the truly extravagant. They were a fact of life for a wide tier of comfortable families, women who came by bus or by arrangement, who knew the kitchen better than you did in some ways, and whose presence shaped the rhythm of your day in ways that were rarely spoken aloud. You meet her in the kitchen, already dressed, already composed, because a wealthy housewife did not receive her staff in disarray. Her name is someone you have known for years, long enough that the formality between you has softened into something more comfortable, though it has never entirely disappeared. That was the way of it in the 1950s, a particular register of relationship that existed between employer and employee in a private home, warmer than professional and more bounded than friendship, held in place by mutual understanding of what was expected on both sides. She hangs her coat on the hook by the back door, ties on her apron with quick, practiced hands, and the household shifts into its working gear around you both. You go over the day together at the kitchen table, your notebook open, her attention complete. The weekly rhythm of the house has its own logic that you have worked out together over time. Certain rooms on certain days, the silver on Thursdays, the floors on Mondays, the bathrooms twice a week without needing to be asked. But today, there is a dinner party on Friday, and that changes the weight of the week considerably. The guest linens need to come down from the cedar chest and be checked for any spots that need attention. The dining room chandelier has been gathering dust since the last time you looked at it closely. The silver candelabras want polishing, and so does the serving set you rarely use outside of company. You go through the list methodically, not as someone giving orders, but as two people planning shared work, which is closer to what it actually is. She makes her own notes in the small pad she keeps in her apron pocket, and occasionally she adds something you had not thought of, a detail that needs attending to, a supply running low, a small repair that has been quietly waiting. You trust her judgment in these things because she has earned that trust across several years of daily proximity to the house and its needs. There is a particular skill involved in managing a household staff that no one talks about plainly. The skill of maintaining clear expectations while preserving a working relationship that must sustain itself across years of close quarters. You have seen households where the distance was kept too rigid and the work suffered for it, and others where the lines blurred in ways that created problems of a different kind. You have found, over time, your own calibration. Respectful, direct, consistent in what you ask, and generous in the ways that matter. By 8:30, she's already at work, and you have moved to the sitting room with your second cup of coffee and your social calendar, and the house is humming around you with the particular sound of a place being well cared for. It is not a dramatic sound. It is the sound of a vacuum in a distant room, of a window being opened to let the morning air in, of water running in the kitchen. Small sounds that together add up to something you could not easily name but would notice immediately if it were absent. The management of a household like yours is invisible labour in the truest sense. Not because it goes unappreciated exactly, but because when it is done well, it disappears entirely into the texture of daily life. The dinner party on Friday will be beautiful and unhurried, and the guests will move through it without once thinking about the work that made it possible. That is precisely the point, and it is, in its quiet way, a considerable achievement. There is a particular kind of pride that lives in a well-set breakfast table, and in 1950s America, it was one of the first measures by which a household was quietly judged. The orange juice was freshly squeezed. The toast arrived at the right moment. The eggs were made to order, soft or firm according to each person's preference, because in a house run properly, those things were known without asking. You sit at your own place at the table after your husband and children have been served, and for a few minutes the room holds the warm, ordinary sounds of a family beginning its day together. Coffee cups lifted and set down, pages of the morning paper turning, a child announcing something about school. Your husband eats quickly, the way men do when their morning is organised around a departure time. He reads the business section while he finishes his eggs, and you do not take it personally, because this is the established choreography of weekday mornings, and you know its rhythms as well as you know anything. You refill his coffee without being asked because you know when he is almost out before he does, and he thanks you with the brief, genuine warmth of someone who notices without always commenting. These are the small fluencies of a long marriage, the knowing and the being known in ordinary ways. The children are more animated. Your daughter wants to talk about a project at school, something involving construction paper and the solar system, and you listen with real attention while monitoring the clock above the stove. By 9:30, with the breakfast things cleared and your husband's car already gone from the drive, you settle at the small writing desk in the sitting room and open your social calendar. It is a serious document. in the world of a prosperous 1950s housewife. The social calendar was not a collection of pleasant extras appended to real life. It was real life, organised and managed with the same focus a businesswoman might bring to a ledger. There were luncheons to accept or decline, committee meetings for the garden club and the hospital auxiliary, dinner parties to plan and reciprocate, and a shifting web of social obligations that required constant, careful tending. The calendar itself is a leather-bound book, the kind with a page for each week laid out in neat columns, and yours is written in a small, consistent hand that reflects the same quality of attention you bring to everything you manage. Appointments in blue ink, reminders in pencil, erasable, because the social world shifts and things need moving. You have developed, over the years of managing a household at this level of activity, a particular gift for holding multiple timelines in mind simultaneously, for knowing that if you accept the Hendersons' invitation for the 14th, you will need to reciprocate before the end of the month, and that the end of the month is already quite full. This morning you are navigating a small conflict. The hospital auxiliary is meeting on Thursday, which you had already committed to, and a friend has just telephoned to ask if you might join a small luncheon the same afternoon. You consider this the way you consider most social decisions, which is to say carefully and with attention to consequence. The auxiliary meeting matters in a way that goes beyond obligation. You're on the planning committee for the spring event and your presence is expected and useful. The luncheon is lovely but can be rescheduled. You make a note to telephone your friend this afternoon with a warm alternative suggestion and turn to the next item. There are invitations to answer. 2 have arrived this week, one a formal card for a dinner at the club next Friday, one a handwritten note from a neighbour whose daughter is being married in June and who wants to discuss arrangements for a small gathering beforehand. You answer them both at the desk in the good stationery in ink, because that is how such things are done, and you would not consider doing them otherwise. The handwritten reply is a form of courtesy that the decade understood in a way that has since become harder to find. What people rarely recognised from the outside was how much executive function this life required. The social calendar was not managed by instinct. It was managed by knowledge, by the accumulated understanding of who needed to be seen and when, of which obligations carried real weight and which were merely pleasant, of how to keep a social world in balance in the same way you kept a household budget in balance, attending to the whole while managing the parts. You had learned this over years, and from women who had done it before you, your mother chief among them, and you had made it your own. By 10 o'clock you have answered the correspondence, updated the calendar through the end of the month, made a note about a hostess gift needed for next week, and identified a Thursday afternoon in 3 weeks that could work for a small dinner of your own. You close the calendar and set it back in its drawer. The morning is still early, and there is still a great deal left to do. You do not leave the house looking anything less than put together. That was simply not done, not in your neighbourhood, not in your decade. By mid-morning, with your gloves on and your handbag over your arm, you back the car out of the garage and begin the round of errands that a well-run household required in the days before supercentres and online ordering. The butcher, the dry cleaner, the florist, because there is a dinner on Friday and the arrangement in the foyer needs replacing. There is a particular pleasure in these morning drives, the town still fresh and quiet, the streets lined with elms, the shop owners who know your name and your preferences and have your order half ready before you reach the counter. The car is a 1952 model in a dark green that your husband chose and you've come to love, and it handles the quiet streets of your suburb with a solidity that feels appropriate to the hour. You drive with the window cracked, because the morning air is cool and clean in the way it only is before the day is fully warmed, and the radio plays something light and instrumental that you're only half listening to. The route to town is familiar enough that it requires no particular thought, which leaves your mind free to move through the day ahead, ordering it, checking it against itself the way you do. The butcher is your first stop and you have a standing order that you adjust seasonally. But today there is a specific conversation to have about the tenderloin for Friday. He is a man your father's age who has been behind that counter longer than you have been married, and he talks about cuts of meat with a precision and a genuine enthusiasm that you have always found quietly admirable. He knows that you prefer your roast trimmed a particular way and that your husband likes the fat left on. He remembers these things without being reminded, the same way you remember the preferences of your dinner guests. It is a form of professional care that the decade understood well and valued without particularly examining. At the dry cleaner you drop off 2 of your husband's suits and a tablecloth that came back from the last dinner party, with a faint shadow near one end that the housekeeper could not fully address at home. The woman behind the counter examines it with the same focused attention the butcher brings to meat, tilting it toward the light, pressing the fabric between her fingers. She thinks it will come out, she says. She will call you Thursday. You thank her and mean it. The florist is where the morning's errands become something closer to genuine pleasure. The shop smells of cold water and greenery, and the particular sweetness of cut flowers in a cool room, and you stand at the counter for several minutes longer than is strictly necessary, because the choosing is part of what you enjoy. You know what the foyer needs: something tall enough to read from the front door, something in a colour that works with the wallpaper and the light on Friday evening. She shows you what came in this morning, and you decide on white peonies and something green and structural, and the arrangement is settled in the easy way of 2 people who have been making decisions together long enough to trust each other's eye. You stop briefly at the stationer's for a box of the correspondence cards you're running low on, and at the pharmacy for a prescription your husband mentioned needing. These are the small practical threads that a household requires someone to hold, unremarkable individually and collectively essential. The difference between a house that runs and a house that perpetually needs something. You hold them without effort because you have been holding them for long enough that they no longer feel like effort. By the time you pull back into the garage, the morning has moved toward noon, and the car's back seat holds a paper-wrapped parcel from the butcher, a brown bag from the pharmacy, and the florist's box secured with a length of green twine. Small things, ordinary things. The raw material of a Friday dinner that will look entirely effortless. For a wealthy woman in 1950s America, the country club was less a place of leisure and more a second home, a carefully maintained social arena where reputations were built and sustained over chicken salad and iced tea. You pull into the curved drive a little before noon, and already there are familiar cars in the lot, women you know by sight and by history, women whose mothers knew your mother, whose children go to school with your children, whose husbands sit on the same boards as yours. The club smells of cut grass and chlorine, and something faintly floral drifting from the dining room, and the sounds of a Tuesday morning here are all soft ones. Low conversation, the clink of silverware, a tennis ball on a distant court. The young man at the entrance greets you by name, the same way every staff member here greets every member by name. A small courtesy that is also a form of confirmation, an acknowledgement that you belong here, that your presence is expected and welcome. You hand over your light jacket and move through the foyer into the main room, and the atmosphere settles around you like something familiar put back on. There are women already at the corner table, and one of them raises a hand and you cross toward them, because this is where you're expected to be, and because, genuinely, you're glad to see them. The country club in the 1950s was a world that operated by its own codes, understood by everyone within it, and largely invisible to everyone outside. The seating arrangements in the dining room were not accidental. Who lunched with whom, and how often, and at what table, said something quiet and legible to anyone who knew how to read it. You had learned to read it early, partly from your mother and partly from your own years of navigation. and you move through this world now with a fluency that looked from the outside like ease, and was on the inside the product of considerable accumulated knowledge. Lunch is ordered from a menu that changes seasonally, but within which certain dishes have achieved the status of permanent fixtures. The chicken salad is one of them, served with a particular dressing that members have been requesting the recipe for as long as anyone can remember, and which the kitchen has never quite surrendered. You order it today as you do most Tuesdays, and the familiarity of it is part of what the club offers, the comfort of predictability within a social context that is never entirely without its tensions. The conversation at the table moves through its familiar registers. There is news from the neighbourhood, a family on Elm Street who are moving, the new addition going up on the Whitfield property that has prompted some commentary. There is discussion of the summer gala, which is being chaired this year by someone newer to the committee and about whom opinions are still being formed. There is a brief, carefully worded exchange about a marriage that has been the subject of speculation, conducted in the particular tone that means everything is being communicated and nothing is being said directly. You contribute where you have something to add and listen with attention where you do not, because listening well is its own form of social currency, and you have always understood that. The afternoon light shifts through the dining room windows, crossing the white tablecloths in slow, quiet patterns. Glasses are refilled. The conversation moves on. This is not leisure in the way the word is usually meant, but it is in its way essential work, and you have always known the difference. There is something important that tends to get lost in the soft-focus version of the 1950s housewife, something that deserves to be looked at directly. Many of these women, the educated, capable, energetic women who'd been told that their domain was the home, channeled a significant portion of their intelligence and organisational talent into charitable work, and they did it with a seriousness that matched any professional endeavour. You arrive at the committee meeting a few minutes early, because you're always a few minutes early, and the room is already filling with women who have done their homework. Reports have been prepared, figures have been checked. Today you're discussing the spring fundraiser, and the conversation that follows is focused, efficient, and quietly impressive. The meeting is held in the back room of the library, a space that the committee has used for years, with its long table and its tall windows and the particular smell of old paper and floor polish that has become, for you, the smell of this kind of work. You set your folder down at your usual seat, pour yourself a glass of water from the pitcher at the centre of the table, and exchange a few words with a woman to your left, a former teacher who brought to the committee the same methodical attention she once brought to a classroom and who remains, in your private estimation, its most indispensable member. The chairwoman calls the meeting to order with a business-like efficiency that you appreciate. There are 10 items on the agenda and she intends to move through them. The first is the venue question, the spring fundraiser having outgrown the space where it was held last year, and you have done the research on this. You have visited 2 possible locations, spoken to the event coordinators at each, compared the costs and the capacities and the available dates, and you present what you found with the same clarity you would bring to any report. The committee listens, asks good questions, and moves toward a decision. This is the rhythm of the work at its best, informed, purposeful, collectively intelligent. What strikes you sometimes, sitting in rooms like this, is the quality of mind assembled around the table. Several of these women attended the same universities as their husbands. Several of them had careers, briefly before marriage. All of them are running households and raising children and managing the complex social obligations of their class while also doing this work, and the work is real. The hospital auxiliary that the committee supports funds 2 wards. The scholarship fund they administer has sent 14 young women to college in the past 6 years. These are not decorative achievements. They are substantive ones, accomplished by people operating largely without recognition or professional title. You feel this most clearly in the moments when a problem presents itself that requires real thinking. Today it's a budget shortfall that will require either cutting a program or finding new donors, and the discussion that follows is one of the best arguments you have heard for what these women are capable of. Solutions are proposed, tested, challenged, refined. Numbers are examined from several angles. A compromise emerges that satisfies no one entirely, and is therefore, as someone at the table observes dryly, probably the right answer. By the time the meeting concludes, you have been here 2 hours and covered every item on the agenda. You gather your folder and exchange brief words with several members on the way out, confirming follow-up tasks, comparing schedules for the next meeting, the ordinary traffic of people who work well together. Outside, the afternoon has warmed considerably. You walk to your car feeling the particular satisfaction of work that matters, done among people who take it seriously. It is not the kind of satisfaction that makes the newspapers, but it is real, and you know the difference. The weekly luncheon is both an event and an institution, and you have been hosting and attending them long enough to understand the delicate architecture involved. It is not simply a meal, it is a statement about your household, your taste, your position in the social order, and the care you extend to the people in your life. Your table is set with the good china, the pattern you chose when you were first married and have used for guests ever since. The flowers are arranged low enough for easy conversation across the table. The food has been carefully planned, not too heavy for the hour, not so spare that anyone leaves hungry, and served with the unhurried elegance that a good luncheon requires. The guests arrive within a window of about 10 minutes, which is the way of things among women who know each other well and have no interest in making a production of punctuality in either direction. They come in pairs and singly, coats handed to the housekeeper, greetings exchanged in the foyer with the particular warmth of women who see each other frequently enough to have moved past formality into something more comfortable. You're in the dining room when the first of them arrives, and at the door by the time the last one does, the movement between the two accomplished with enough smoothness that no one would notice it was a movement at all. There are 6 of you today, a number you have found over years of hosting to be close to ideal for a luncheon of this kind, intimate enough for a single conversation to carry the whole table, large enough that the responsibility of holding that conversation does not fall on any one person for too long. You have thought about the seating with care, placing 2 women together who have not seen each other since the winter and who will have things to say to each other, and separating 2 others who have a tendency, in each other's company, to conduct a parallel conversation that divides the table. The first course is a cold soup in small cups, pale and elegant, the kind of thing that announces without announcing that someone put thought into this. The conversation at this stage of a luncheon is always lightest, running along the surface of things, gathering itself. You move it gently, asking questions and following answers, keeping the energy even, the way a good hostess does so naturally that no one is aware of it as management. By the main course, the table has found its own momentum. There is laughter over something that happened at the club. There is a longer, more serious exchange about a school situation that 2 of the women share an interest in. There is the kind of gossip that exists at every table of women who know each other well enough to trust, conducted without malice, but with the frank interest in human behaviour that has been one of the more reliable pleasures of female company across every era. You eat your own meal in the way that hostesses always do, in the margins of everything else, a bite between conversations, attention divided pleasantly between the food and the room. You notice the soup was perhaps slightly too cold, but decide it does not matter. You notice that one of your guests is quieter than usual, and make a note to telephone her later in the week. These are the small observations that a good hostess holds, the ones that make a luncheon more than the sum of its courses. After the dessert, which is light and seasonal, The conversation slows into the warm, unhurried drift that signals a successful meal reaching its natural end. Cups are refilled. The afternoon light has shifted in the dining room, moving from the east windows to the south ones, and it falls across the tablecloth now in long, warm rectangles that make everything look, for a moment, like a painting of itself. Your guests stay a little longer than the hour requires, which is the best possible measure of a luncheon well given. And when the last one has gone and the door is closed and the house is quiet again around you, you stand for a moment in the dining room and let yourself feel the particular satisfaction of a thing done well. The glasses still hold the light, the flowers are still opening, and the afternoon is still yours. In the afternoon you go to the department store, and it is never simply shopping. It has never been simply shopping. In 1950s, America, the great department stores of any city worth its name were destinations in their own right. Cathedrals of comfort and aspiration, where a wealthy woman could spend a genuinely pleasant 2 hours without once feeling rushed. You enter through the main doors and the smell of the place reaches you before anything else does. A particular combination of perfume counters and wool fabrics, and something warm from the restaurant on the upper floor. The saleswomen know how to read a customer. They bring things without being asked. The ground floor is all glass cases and soft light. The perfume and cosmetics counters arranged with a precision that suggests ceremony rather than commerce. You do not stop here today, though you pause for a moment at the counter where you've bought your perfume for the past several years, long enough to nod to the woman behind the glass who has helped you on a dozen previous visits. She acknowledges you with the composed warmth of someone who understands that this is a relationship of a particular kind, professional and pleasant and consistent across time. You take the elevator to the third floor, which is linens and housewares, because you've been meaning for weeks to look at tablecloths, and the dinner on Friday has focused that intention. The elevator operator pulls the gate closed and presses the button with a practiced efficiency, and the brief vertical journey is one of those small enclosed moments that the decade offered in abundance, unhurried, contained, pleasantly inconsequential. You step out into the soft light of the housewares floor, and the hush of it settles around you. A saleswoman approaches and you tell her what you're looking for. A cloth in white or ivory, formal enough for a seated dinner of 8. And she leads you to the appropriate section with the confidence of someone who knows this floor as well as you know your own house. The cloths are brought out one at a time and laid across the display table, so you can see the weight and the drape, and the particular quality of the weave in the store's carefully calibrated light. You take your time, because taking your time is something this kind of store understands and accommodates. There is a pleasure in this that is about more than acquisition. It is about the quality of attention that the transaction involves, on both sides. The saleswoman has knowledge that is worth something, and she shares it without condescension, pointing out differences in the linen blends, noting which cloths have held up better to laundering based on what customers have reported. You listen and ask questions and feel, by the end of it, that you have made an informed decision rather than a convenient one. You select a cloth in heavy ivory, with a drawn thread border along the hem, and while it is being wrapped, you allow yourself a brief detour to the china section to look, without any particular intention to buy, at a pattern you have admired for some time. On the way out you pass through the clothing floor without stopping, though you pause once at a display of wool jersey in a particular shade of green that catches your attention. You do not buy it today. You note it. This is another form of the same management, the household of the self, the tracking of what wants attention and what can wait. The afternoon air outside the department store is cool against your face, a contrast to the warm interior, and you stand for a moment on the sidewalk with your parcels before walking to the car. The town is fully alive at this hour, people moving in both directions, a few other women from the neighbourhood who nod in passing, the ordinary traffic of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Nothing extraordinary has happened. And yet the afternoon has been genuinely pleasant in the way that a day running smoothly and a task completed properly are genuinely pleasant. That is enough. It has always been enough. Wednesday afternoon belongs to your standing appointment at the Salon, and it has for years. Your hair, your nails, the particular rituals of maintenance that a well-groomed woman of your position was expected to observe. These were not indulgences in the 1950s. They were obligations, quiet and consistent ones, as expected as a clean house or a prompt reply to an invitation. You sit in the chair and your stylist greets you by name, and the conversation begins easily, the way conversations do between two people who have seen each other every week for longer than either of them has counted. Outside the salon window, the afternoon goes on without you, and for an hour or so that feels entirely acceptable. The Salon is on the better end of the main street, the kind of place that has had the same name on the door since before you started coming here, with a particular smell that is entirely its own, a blend of setting solution and warm air, and the faint sweetness of the hand lotion kept in a pump bottle beside every station. The chairs are the old-fashioned kind, substantial and upholstered in a dark vinyl that has been wiped down so many times it has a certain dignified shine. There are mirrors everywhere, angled to give you multiple perspectives on a face you know well, and continue, at this remove, to study with something between vanity and detached professional interest. Your stylist has been doing your hair since shortly after you moved to the neighbourhood, a fact that has given her a particular authority in your life that you have long since stopped thinking about. She knows the weight of your hair on different days, the way it behaves in humidity, the specific adjustment required when you have let the between-appointment interval stretch a day or two longer than intended. She does not comment on this when it happens. She simply corrects for it with the quiet competence of someone who has been solving the same set of problems long enough to do so without drama. Today is a full appointment, a shampoo and set and a manicure afterward, which means nearly 2 hours in this chair and the one beside it. 2 hours in which you are, more completely than at almost any other point in your week, not required to do anything. The paradox of the beauty appointment in the 1950s was exactly this, that it was one of the few contexts in which a woman of your position could sit still without it being read as idleness. The appointment was productive, it was maintenance, it was the upkeep of the image that your social world required of you, and so it justified its own duration in a way that simply sitting and reading for 2 hours would not have done. You are aware of this, you have always been aware of this, and you allow yourself to enjoy the 2 hours anyway, because the awareness does not diminish the pleasure. The conversation between you and your stylist has the quality of all long-running conversations between women who meet regularly in a context of physical proximity and unhurried time. It covers everything and nothing. The neighbourhood, the children, something your stylist's sister is going through, something you are managing in your own household that you would not discuss in most other rooms. There is a confidence in this chair that belongs to its particular atmosphere, the warmth of the dryer overhead, the steady hands working at your hair, the mirrors reflecting a version of yourself in process. Things get said here that find no other occasion. The manicure that follows is quieter, a different kind of attention, the careful work of a young woman who does not yet know you well, but who does her work with a focus and a gentleness that you appreciate without quite articulating. You choose the same colour you have worn for the past several months, a soft rose that suits your colouring and reads well in the evenings, and you hold your hand still while she works and let your mind move freely through the coming week. By the time you walk out the front door of the salon, the late afternoon light is long and golden across the pavement, and your hair is set and your nails are fresh, and you feel, in the particular way of someone who has just been carefully attended to, restored to some version of yourself that the week had been gradually wearing away. You drive home through the early evening with the window cracked, not listening to the radio. Some things do not need a soundtrack. They only need to be noticed while they are still present. You're home by 3, because 3 o'clock is when the children arrive, and in your household the hours between school's end and dinner are yours to manage with the same care you bring to everything else. Wealthy mothers in the 1950s were not hands-off figures drifting elegantly through their children's lives. They were present, organised, and deeply invested in the architecture of childhood, from piano lessons to homework supervision, to the kind of guided conversation at the kitchen table that was meant to build character alongside arithmetic. Your daughter has ballet at 4. Your son has been told to change out of his school clothes before he does anything else. These are the small, repeated instructions that hold a household's shape. They come through the back door the way children always do, with more noise and energy than the house has held all day, dropping bags and coats in the approximate vicinity of where they belong, talking before they are fully inside. You're in the kitchen, and you receive them the way you receive most things, with attention and without alarm. There is a snack already set out because children who have been sitting in school since 8 in the morning arrive home with a specific kind of hunger that is part physical and part something else entirely, a need to transition, to decompress, to be in a room where no one is grading them. You have known this without ever having to be told. Your daughter is 8 and serious about ballet in the way that 8-year-olds are serious about things, completely and temporarily, though you do not know yet which it will turn out to be. She eats her crackers and changes into her leotard with a focused efficiency that makes you smile, and you drive her to the studio at 3:45 through the quiet streets of the late afternoon, the radio off, the two of you talking about her day in the easy, unhurried way of a car ride that neither of you is in a hurry to end. She tells you about a disagreement with a friend, described with the full weight that such things carry at 8, and you listen without minimizing it, because the size of a feeling is not measured against anyone else's. You wait for her in the row of chairs along the studio wall, among the other mothers doing the same thing, some with a needlepoint or letters to write, some simply watching through the glass as their daughters learn to hold their arms in a particular way. There is a companionship in this waiting that requires no particular effort, a shared understanding of what it means to organise your afternoon around someone else's development, and to find, in that organising, something genuinely worthwhile. You're not watching the clock. You're watching your daughter cross the studio floor with her chin lifted in the way the teacher has been showing them, and the pride you feel is quiet and complete. Your son is 9 and going through a period of intense interest in model airplanes, which means the kitchen table has become, after homework is done, a landscape of small balsa wood pieces and bottles of glue that require supervision without interference. You've learned the precise distance at which your presence is welcome and your advice is not, a calibration that shifts slightly each week as he grows into himself. Tonight he works on a particular wing assembly that has been frustrating him for 3 days, and you sit nearby with a cup of tea and the evening's menu to review, close enough to be company, far enough to let him solve it himself. He solves it himself, and the satisfaction on his face when the piece holds is something you catalogue quietly and carry with you. Homework is managed at the kitchen table before dinner, a rule established early and maintained consistently, because consistency is the foundation of the household's logic. You move between your daughter's arithmetic and your son's reading comprehension, helping where the help is needed and withdrawing when it is not, conducting both conversations while also monitoring the stove, because dinner does not wait for long division to be resolved. This is the particular kind of multitasking that the decade did not have a word for, and that women of your position performed every afternoon as a matter of course. There is a version of this life that looks, from the outside, like it is entirely about the children. And it is true that the afternoon hours are organised almost entirely around their needs, their schedules, their homework and their moods and their small daily griefs and triumphs. But there is a distinction between organising your life around someone and losing yourself in it, and you have worked across years of mothering to maintain that distinction. You're present for your children in ways that matter. You're also still yourself, with your own thoughts and your own sense of what the day has been, and your own quiet life running alongside the louder one you manage for them. By 6 o'clock the homework is done, and your daughter has shown you the new position she learned at ballet, performed in the hallway with grave concentration, and your son has set the model carefully on the shelf in his room where the finished ones stand in a row. The kitchen smells of dinner and the house has shifted into its evening register, warmer and fuller and slightly louder than the daytime version. You stand at the stove and stir something that needs stirring, and the sounds of your children moving through the house behind you are the texture of this hour, familiar and ordinary, and, in the way that ordinary things sometimes are, quietly irreplaceable. There is a way a house like yours is supposed to feel, and you have been working toward that feeling consciously and not for as long as you've lived in it. It is not about perfection for its own sake, though the standards are high. It is about atmosphere, about the particular combination of colour and light and arrangement that makes a room feel welcoming in the specific way that well-tended rooms do. You walk through the downstairs in the late afternoon the way you do most days, a quiet survey, adjusting a cushion here, straightening a frame there, noticing what the housekeeper caught and what she missed. The house is your longest ongoing project, and you know every room of it the way a painter knows a canvas they keep returning to. The living room is where you begin, because it is the room that sets the register for the rest of the house, the room that guests enter first and that your family inhabits most. The sofa cushions have been plumped since this morning, but one has slipped slightly in the way that cushions do, and you correct it without stopping, a gesture so practiced it requires no decision. The flowers on the side table are 2 days old and still good, but you make a note that they will need replacing tomorrow. The lamp by the reading chair casts its circle of warm light across the rug at this hour, and you stand for a moment in the doorway just to see the room as a visitor would see it, which is a habit you developed early and have never abandoned. The dining room is next, and you check it with Friday's dinner in mind. The china is in the cabinet, the crystal on the shelf above it. You open the silver drawer and run a quick eye over the serving pieces, the ones you will need for Friday, confirming that the housekeeper has attended to them since you discussed it this morning. She has. The surfaces are clean and the room smells faintly of the beeswax the housekeeper uses on the table, a smell you have associated with the prospect of company for so long that it has become, for you, the smell of anticipation. The idea that a home could be curated, that it was a living expression of the woman who managed it, was one the 1950s understood with an intensity that later decades have not quite sustained. The magazines of the era were relentless on this point, and you absorbed their logic early, not uncritically, but thoroughly. Your home was a reflection of your values, your aesthetic, your care for the people who lived in it and passed through it, and you took that reflection seriously in the way you took most things seriously, without making a performance of it. What that meant in practice was attention, continuous, quiet attention to the details that together produced the whole. The guest towels in the downstairs bathroom, always fresh, always folded in the same way. The books on the living room shelf, arranged not by colour as some of the magazines suggested, but by subject, because you wanted a room that looked lived in by someone who actually read. The throw at the end of the sofa in a colour that picked up the curtain fabric without matching it precisely. None of these things were large. All of them were deliberate. You move through the study where your husband's desk sits in the order he prefers, which is an order only he fully understands, but which you have learned to leave undisturbed. The hallway, the staircase, the the upstairs landing with its small table and its framed botanical prints that you have never quite decided whether you love or merely tolerate. These rooms are yours to manage and also, in some sense, to inhabit, and the distinction between management and habitation blurs in a house you have lived in long enough to know in your bones. By the time you complete the circuit and return to the kitchen, the late light is moving off the back garden, and the house has settled into the particular stillness of the early evening, when the day's activity has passed and the evening's has not yet begun. You lean against the kitchen counter for a moment, and let the quiet of it rest around you. The house is as it should be, and for this brief interval, before the children come back downstairs and the evening begins, that is enough to simply notice. At 5:30 your husband's key turns in the lock, and the day shifts into its evening register. Cocktail hour in a prosperous 1950s household was not an afterthought. It was a deliberate transition, a small daily ceremony that marked the boundary between the working world and the domestic one, and the woman of the house was its quiet architect. You have the drinks tray ready. The ice is in the bucket. The glasses are the good ones, the ones that catch the late light coming through the living room window. You have changed into something more composed than what you wore for errands, and the children have been fed early, because this hour belongs to the two of you, in a way the rest of the day rarely does. He comes through the door carrying the particular tiredness of a man who's been performing competence all day, the kind that does not show on the surface but that you have learned to read in the set of his shoulders and the way he sets down his briefcase. You do not ask him how his day was the moment he crosses the threshold. You have learned over years of marriage that men need a few minutes to make the transition, to leave the office behind them and actually arrive, in the room they are standing in. You hand him his drink when he is ready for it and not before, and the timing of that small gesture has become, over time, one of the private languages of your marriage. The drinks tray itself is a considered object. The crystal decanter your mother-in-law gave you on your first anniversary. The silver ice bucket monogrammed, a wedding gift from friends who knew your taste better than most. The small linen cocktail napkins pressed, stacked in their precise pile. These things are not expensive gestures made to impress. They are the repeated daily expression of a certain belief about how life at home should feel, which is to say, intentional, careful, and genuinely pleasant rather than merely functional. The living room at this hour has a quality all its own. The lamps are on and the curtains are not yet drawn, and the light outside is doing the thing it does in the late afternoon, going golden and long and slightly elegiac in the way of days that are ending well. You sit in your usual chairs, not across from each other, but at the angle that allows conversation without confrontation, the arrangement that good living rooms are designed to produce, and that you have reproduced in every house you have lived in since you understood what you were doing. He talks about his day, and you listen in the way that a good listener does, not passively, but actively, asking the question that moves the story forward, noting the name he mentions more than once, understanding from the tone of a sentence what the words themselves do not quite say. You have been listening to this man for long enough to hear what is underneath things, and it is one of the more intimate forms of knowing that a long marriage produces, this literacy of another person's subtext. You tell him something about your own day, not the comprehensive accounting you might give to a close friend, but the selected version that a husband in the 1950s received. The things he would find interesting, the small development in the children, the decision made about Friday. He listens with the quality of attention that is easier when a man is sitting down with a drink in his hand and the day's obligations behind him, and you have always known how to reach that quality of attention and how to wait for it. The ice shifts in the glasses with a small sound. The room is warm from the day's stored heat. Outside, the neighbourhood is going through its own version of this transition, lawns being watered, cars pulling into driveways, the sounds of other households settling toward evening. This hour is not long. It ends when dinner is ready, or when a child requires something, or when the practical world reasserts its claim. But while it lasts, it is genuinely yours, this quiet interval between the day that was and the evening that is coming, held in 2 chairs and 2 glasses, and the easy silence of 2 people who have learned to be comfortable in each other's company. That is not a small thing. It has never been a small thing. You've been planning this dinner for 3 weeks. The guest list was considered carefully, the seating chart revised twice, the menu discussed with the housekeeper on Monday, and agreed upon after some negotiation over the fish course. Tonight 8 people will sit at your table, people who matter in the way that social life in 1950s America assigned mattering, a couple from the club, a colleague of your husband's and his wife, old friends from the neighbourhood whose company you genuinely enjoy. The table has been set since this afternoon, the crystal catching the light from the chandelier, the centrepiece low and fragrant, the silver so polished you can see your reflection in it if you lean close enough. You dressed an hour ago, before any of the anxiety of the final preparations could translate itself into your appearance. This is something you learned from watching your mother, that a hostess must be composed before the first guest arrives, and that composure, once lost, is difficult to recover in the presence of people who are watching you without knowing they are watching you. Your dress is the one you selected 3 days ago and tried on twice since. A deep burgundy wool crepe that suits the season and the occasion, and your jewellery is simple, because the room and the table will do their own work tonight, and you do not need to compete with them. The first guests arrive at 7, the neighbourhood friends, punctual in the comfortable way of people who do not need to make an impression, and you take their coats and lead them into the living room where your husband is already stationed with the drinks and the particular warmth he brings to company, a warmth that is genuine and that you have always admired in him. The next couple arrives within minutes, and then the last, and the room fills with the specific energy of a dinner party in its opening phase. Everyone still a little formal, still finding the frequency. This is the part you manage most consciously. The first 20 minutes of a dinner party are the ones that set the tone for everything that follows, and you move through the room with attention, connecting people who do not yet know each other with the small conversational introductions that give them somewhere to begin, refilling a glass before it is empty enough to require asking, steering the energy away from a corner where it has pooled too densely toward another where it has not yet arrived. It looks like hosting. It is in fact a form of orchestration. The food is served with the timing you worked out with the housekeeper that afternoon. The course is arriving at intervals long enough for conversation to develop, but short enough to keep the evening moving. The soup is the right temperature. The fish course, which was the subject of negotiation, is excellent. You know this because you tasted it at 6 o'clock and made one small adjustment, and the result is a dish that receives a genuine compliment from the woman to your husband's left, who knows food well enough for the compliment to mean something. The conversation at your table moves through several registers over the course of the evening, the light and the serious and the quietly contentious, guided by you with a hand so light that no one would be able to identify it as guidance. You ask the question that opens the topic. You offer the observation that changes the direction when a direction needs changing. You laugh at the right moment and listen at the right moment, and allow the silences that a good dinner table can sustain without discomfort. The evening ends a little past 10. The guests leaving with the warm, slightly reluctant energy of people who've been genuinely well entertained. The door closes on the last of them, and the house holds the aftermath of it all. The faint smell of perfume and candle smoke. The glass is still on the table, the particular silence that follows a room full of people. Your husband puts his arm around your shoulders briefly and says, "That was wonderful." You agree with him. It was. Before anyone arrives, before the door opens and the first coats are taken and the first drinks are poured, there is the ritual of getting dressed, And in your world, it is a ritual that deserves that word. You stand in your dressing room in the early evening and consider your options with the same thoughtfulness you would bring to any significant decision, because this is, in its way, a significant decision. What you wear tonight is a statement about the occasion, about your household, and in some quiet degree about yourself. The evening dress you've chosen is dark, elegant, not new, but still exactly right. Jewellery selected, shoes decided on, hair already arranged from this afternoon's appointment. The dressing room is the most private room in the house, the one that belongs entirely to the process of becoming the version of yourself that the evening requires. It is not large, but it is ordered. The closet organised by occasion, and then by colour. The jewellery in the fitted case your mother gave you when you married, each piece in its own section, the kind of organisation that reflects the same instinct for system that runs through everything you manage. You move through it without effort, finding what you need where you put it, which is the particular satisfaction of a well-ordered space. The dress goes on first, the long zipper managed in the mirror with the practised ease of a woman who has been dressing herself for evening since she was 18. The fabric falls the way good fabric falls, with its own weight and conviction, and you smooth it once with your palms and step back to look. The colour does what you hoped it would do in this light, which is to say it is serious without being sombre, and the cut is one that you have worn before and know how to move in. This matters. A dress you cannot move in easily is a dress that will steal your attention all evening, and your attention has other things to do tonight. The jewellery is a matter of balance, calibrating against the dress and the occasion, and the other women who will be at the table, none of whom you intend to outshine and none of whom you intend to disappear beside. The pearl earrings and the simple gold bracelet, not the diamond brooch which is for different occasions, not nothing which would read as careless. The middle register, worn with enough ease that it looks unconsidered, which is the result of considerable consideration. Shoes last, because the shoes determine your posture, and your posture determines everything else. A heel high enough to carry the dress properly, low enough to manage a long evening on a marble floor without the kind of discomfort that eventually shows in the face. You have a strong opinion about women who suffer visibly through their own dinner parties for the sake of an extra inch, an opinion formed over years of watching it happen at other people's tables. Comfort and elegance are not opposites. They are, when correctly understood, the same project. You sit at the dressing table for the final considerations, the lipstick refreshed, the hair checked in the three-way mirror that tells you what you cannot see straight on. A small adjustment at the crown, a pin secured more firmly, and then you are done, or rather you are ready, which in this context means something more specific. You look like a woman who has given appropriate thought to her appearance without appearing to have thought about it at all. This is the ideal. This is what you have been working toward for the past 45 minutes. You stand once more at the long mirror and take the full measure of yourself, the dress, the jewellery, the hair, the particular expression that your face settles into when you're composed and prepared. You're not vain about this process. You're professional about it, in the way that anyone is professional about the tools required for their work. Tonight your work is to be a gracious and beautiful presence in a room full of people who matter to your household's life, and you intend to do it well. The clock on the dressing room shelf reads 6:45. The first guests arrive at 7. You turn off the dressing room light and walk toward the stairs, ready, in every sense of the word. It would be a mistake to think that the influence of a wealthy housewife in 1950s America ended at her own front door. Many of these women, working through the structures available to them, which meant the PTA, the school board, the hospital board, the library committee, quietly shape the institutions of their communities in lasting ways. You arrive at the monthly PTA meeting with notes you made at home, and a clear sense of what you want the meeting to accomplish. The room is full of women like you, women with organisational skills and community knowledge, and a level of investment in these institutions that no elected official could easily match. The meeting is called to order. You know 3 of the items on the agenda are yours. The school is a red brick building 2 streets from the elementary where your children spend their days, and the meeting room is the one at the end of the corridor where the art projects are displayed on a long corkboard that runs the length of the wall. You have sat in this room every month for 4 years, long enough to know its rhythms, the women who come prepared and the women who do not, the agenda items that will move quickly and the ones that will require management. You open your notebook and uncap your pen, and the meeting begins. The first item is the library budget, which has not kept pace with enrolment, a fact you established 3 months ago by comparing the numbers yourself, and which you presented at the meeting before this one, with enough specificity that it could not be dismissed with a general reassurance. Progress has been made. The principal has agreed in principle to a supplemental allocation. What remains is the question of how the funds will be directed, which titles, which age ranges, which balance between fiction and reference materials. You have a position on this, supported by a conversation you had with the school librarian last week, and you present it clearly and without apology. This is the form of power that the 1950s offered women of your position, influence exercised through committees and boards and meetings, through the accumulated respect that came from showing up prepared and following through consistently, through knowing the right people and asking the right questions and being the person in the room who had actually read the document under discussion. It was not the same as the power your husband exercised in his professional world. It operated through different channels, at different speeds, toward different ends, but it was real, and the women who wielded it understood its weight. The second item on the agenda is the question of the school calendar, specifically a proposal to add a professional development day that would require families to arrange alternative care for their children. The discussion that follows is vigorous and occasionally tense, because this is the kind of practical matter about which women who are actually managing households have strong and specific views. You listen more than you speak during this portion of the meeting, because the landscape of opinion is still clarifying itself, and you have learned that the most effective contribution is often the one made after the shape of a disagreement becomes visible. It becomes visible, and you make it. The meeting moves forward. By the time the final agenda item is addressed and the room begins the small dispersal of women gathering their things, you have helped advance 2 initiatives, deflected one proposal that would have created more problems than it solved, and agreed to chair a subcommittee that will report back in 60 days. You leave the building in the company of 2 women you have known since your oldest child started kindergarten, and the conversation on the way to the parking lot is the debrief that follows every meeting of this kind, frank and collegial and occasionally very funny. You drive home through the dark streets of the neighbourhood, past houses with their lights on, other families in their own evening routines. Your name will not appear in any report. No one will call what you did today leadership, but the library will have better books next year, and the children who read them will never know why. On a warm morning in early summer, you put on your gardening gloves and walk out the back door into the most genuinely personal space in your life. The garden is yours in a way that almost nothing else in a 1950s housewife's world fully was. The house was a shared production, managed for the benefit of others, shaped by expectation and social function. But the garden answered primarily to you. You decided what grew here. You chose the roses along the south fence and the beds of white peonies that came back each June without being asked. You knew the particular light of this yard at different hours, and you worked with it the way someone works with a collaborator they have come to trust completely. The morning is cool still, the dew not yet burned off the grass, and your footsteps leave a faint track across the lawn as you make your way to the border where the work is waiting. You carry your basket and your trowel and the small pruning shears in their leather case, and the weight of them in your hand is familiar and grounding in a way that is difficult to explain to anyone who does not garden. There is something about working in soil in the actual earth of your own yard that returns you to yourself in a register that no other part of your day quite reaches. You begin with the roses, as you always do, because they are the most demanding and the most rewarding, and because they have been growing here long enough to have become, in some quiet way, a relationship. You move along the fence with your shears, cutting what has finished and what needs redirecting, checking each cane for the signs of trouble that your experience has taught you to read before they become visible to anyone else. A spot of rust on a lower leaf, caught early, addressed. A cane crossing another in a way that will create problems in a few weeks, corrected now. The work is slow and attentive, and requires a kind of knowledge that accumulates over years and cannot be hurried. The peonies are coming to the end of their season, the last of the blooms opening wide and heavy and beginning to drop their petals onto the dark soil below. You cut the spent flowers carefully and add them to the basket, leaving the healthy foliage intact because the leaves are doing work even now, storing energy for next year's blooming. This is the kind of patience that gardening teaches and that very few other activities require in quite the same way. The willingness to tend something whose return is months away, to do the work in the present on behalf of a future you can only partly imagine. Behind the peonies is a section you have been developing for 3 seasons, a cutting bed that provides flowers for the house, from late spring through early autumn, and you spend some time here assessing what is coming and what needs support. The sweet peas need tying. The dahlias are advancing well. There is a bare patch where something didn't overwinter as expected, and you crouch to examine the soil, pressing 2 fingers into it to feel the temperature and the moisture, and you decide you will plant something later in the week to fill the space. The garden is the one part of your life where no one is waiting for the result. Dinner must be on the table, invitations must be answered, the children must be delivered and retrieved. But the garden operates on its own calendar and makes its own demands and offers its own rewards on a schedule that has nothing to do with the social world at the front of the house. This is partly what you love about it. Out here, an hour can pass without the sense that it should have been used for something else. You stand up and remove your gloves and look at what the morning's work has produced. A border brought back into its proper shape, a path cleared, a season of growth attended to and encouraged. The light has moved off the dew now and the garden is warm and humming with the sound of insects in the beds, and a bird somewhere in the elm that has been singing the same phrase over and over with cheerful persistence. You pick up your basket. Inside, the list is waiting. But for a little longer you stand in the garden and let the morning hold you, because this is the kingdom of your own making, and you know, in the way you know most things that matter, how rare that is. In the kitchen drawer beside the telephone there is a tin recipe box, and it contains, in your handwriting and in the handwriting of your mother and your mother-in-law, and several women from the cookbook committee at the church, the accumulated culinary knowledge of several generations of women who took feeding their families seriously. You take it out on Thursday mornings when you sit down to plan the following week's meals, and going through it is something between practical work and a small private pleasure. There are cards for the dishes that have become family standards, the ones your children will one day describe as what we always had, and there are newer clippings from magazines, things you have tried and approved, annotated in pencil with notes about what you changed. The tin itself is an old one, a little battered at the corners, with a small dent on one side from a morning years ago, when it fell from the counter and you caught it just too late. You have never thought to replace it. There are objects in a house that have accumulated enough history to earn their continued presence, and this is one of them. You open it and the cards are sorted in categories you established years ago: soups and salads, meats, vegetables, desserts, the miscellaneous section at the back that holds everything that does not fit neatly anywhere else. Your mother's handwriting appears on perhaps a third of the older cards, a forward slanting cursive that you would recognise anywhere, and seeing it still produces a small quiet feeling that does not have a simple name. You begin with next week's dinners, working through the days methodically. Monday is a simple night, something reliable and not too taxing after the weekend. Tuesday, your husband has a late meeting, and dinner will be earlier and lighter. Wednesday is promising, enough time to attempt something more involved, and you pull a card for a braised short rib dish that you have made twice before, and that the family considers a particular occasion, even on a Wednesday. Thursday is flexible. Friday depends on whether anyone calls this week with a suggestion to eat out, which sometimes happens and which you leave a soft opening for. The pleasure of this planning is partly logistical. The satisfaction of a week organised in advance so that the daily question of what is for dinner does not have to be answered from scratch each afternoon. But it is also something more than that. Planning meals is a form of care that the 1950s understood well and practiced without embarrassment. The idea that feeding the people you love thoughtfully, with attention to what they enjoy and what the season offers and what the occasion calls for, is a serious and worthy endeavour. You believe this without reservation. You have always believed it. The clippings from magazines represent the other current in the recipe file, the ongoing conversation you've been conducting with the evolving American table since you first started cooking seriously. The 1950s were a decade of great culinary enthusiasm in certain circles, women's magazines publishing recipes of increasing ambition and variety, drawing on French technique and Italian ingredient, and the growing availability of foods that had not been accessible before the war. You have followed this conversation with genuine interest, trying things that seem worth trying, discarding what does not suit your household's taste, keeping what does. Several of the cards in the file are marked at the top corner with a small star, which is the system you developed without planning to, a way of distinguishing the recipes that have become truly essential from those that are merely good. The starred cards are the ones you could cook in any kitchen with any set of pots, the ones whose proportions you have long since memorized, the ones that have fed your family on ordinary Tuesdays and on Christmases, and on the difficult evenings when something specific was needed, and you knew exactly what it was. You close the box when the week is planned and the shopping list is made, and you set them both on the counter where you will find them tomorrow morning. The tin goes back in its drawer, and the week, already organised around the table that will anchor it, feels ready to begin. Once a year, or thereabouts, the family sits for a formal portrait, and the preparation for it begins several days in advance. This is not vanity, or not only vanity. In a prosperous 1950s household, the formal portrait was a document of a specific kind, proof of stability and continuity, a record of the family as it was meant to be seen. You choose the clothing carefully, your own dress, your husband's suit, the children's outfits pressed and considered and rejected and reconsidered. On the day itself, you have everyone assembled and ready with time to spare, because arriving flustered to anything is not something you permit yourself. The photographer sets up in the living room, and the light comes through the windows at just the right angle, and for a moment everything looks the way it is supposed to look. The preparation begins with a conversation you have with yourself, standing in front of the open closet several evenings before the appointment, thinking about colour and tone and the way the four of you will read together in the frame. You're composing an image, in the most literal sense, and the same instinct that arranges flowers and sets a table is at work here. The desire to produce something that is both beautiful and true, that represents the family not as it is on a difficult morning, but as it is at its best, which is a real thing and not a fiction. Your daughter's dress is selected first, a pale blue wool with a white collar that suits her colouring and photographs well, a fact you know from experience. Your son's outfit is the navy trousers and the white shirt and the small tie that he will spend the entire session trying to loosen, and that you will spend the entire session quietly securing. Your husband's suit is the charcoal grey, which you have always thought makes him look exactly like himself, which is a quality you value in clothing and in photographs. Your own dress is the cream silk with a portrait neckline, chosen partly because the cut will read well against whatever background the photographer selects, and partly because you love it in the way that one loves a particular garment that has proven itself across several occasions. The morning of the portrait you have the household running at a higher register than usual. Everyone is dressed and assembled by the appointed time, which required more effort than it would appear from the outside. Your son has already been warned once about the tie. Your daughter has been redirected away from anything likely to produce a stain. Your husband has been gently reminded twice, the second time less gently, about the appointment time. These are the domestic negotiations that the portrait will not record, and that you perform with the same composed efficiency you bring to everything. The photographer is a man from the firm you have used for several years, reliable in the specific way of someone who understands what families of your kind want from a formal portrait without needing to be told. He moves through the living room with a quiet authority, assessing the light, adjusting a lamp, suggesting a small rearrangement of the furniture, and you follow his suggestions because his eye for this is better than yours, and you know it. This is one of the marks of competence you have always respected in yourself, the ability to defer when someone else's expertise is greater. The sitting itself takes perhaps 40 minutes, longer than expected because your son has discovered that he can make his sister laugh by moving his finger in her peripheral vision, a discovery he finds endlessly worth repeating. You correct this with a look that requires no words. The photographer captures the moment just after the correction, when your daughter is still smiling and your son has composed himself, and the four of you are arranged in the particular configuration of a family that knows itself well. When the proof arrives 3 weeks later, you look at it for a long time. The light is right, the colours are right. Everyone looks, in the best possible sense, like themselves. You order 2 prints, one for the mantelpiece and one for your mother. Summer brings the annual vacation, and in a prosperous household it is a production of some scale. The destination was chosen months ago, a cottage on the Cape, or a resort in the Adirondacks, or perhaps a train journey to visit family in California, and the planning that surrounds it falls largely to you. Reservations confirmed, summer clothes assessed and supplemented, children's activities considered, the house left in good order with instructions for the housekeeper. You think of vacation in 2 registers simultaneously. There is the genuine pleasure of it, the relief of stepping outside ordinary routine, the particular happiness of your children at the beach in the long light of July afternoons, and there is the organisational work of it, which travels with you quietly wherever you go. The packing begins 3 days before departure, which is not excessive. It is realistic, the product of experience with what happens when packing is left at the last evening. The forgotten items and the overfull bags and the particular mood that descends on a household trying to do too much at once. You work through the family methodically, beginning with the children because their needs are most numerous and most easily forgotten. The sunscreen and the extra shoes and the books for the car, and the small necessities that only become apparent when they are absent. Your own things come last, packed with the efficiency of someone who has done this often enough to know exactly what she needs and what she will not actually wear. The train, when your destination requires one, is one of your genuine pleasures. There is something about long-distance train travel in the 1950s, the particular rhythm of the rails beneath you, the landscape unreeling past the window, the dining car with its white tablecloths and its attentive service, that produces in you a quality of attention that ordinary life does not easily allow. You read on trains in a way you do not read at home, with complete absorption, the book held in two hands and the world outside the window moving past in a steady, unhurried panorama. The children, for once, are contained and interested, their faces at the glass for the better part of the first 2 hours. The cottage, when you reach it, requires its own settling in. This is work that you do not resist or resent, because it is the work that transforms a rented place into a temporary home. The unpacking and the arrangement of familiar objects in unfamiliar spaces, the discovery of the kitchen's logic and the particular sounds the house makes at night. By the end of the first day it feels like yours, in the provisional way that vacation places do, and the children have already claimed their bedrooms and identified the path to the beach, and begun to exist in the looser, freer way that children exist when the ordinary schedule is lifted. Your own experience of vacation is layered in a way that the word leisure does not quite capture. There's real rest in it. The mornings on the porch with coffee and without the social calendar, the afternoons on the beach where your only obligation is presence. But the household continues to require its management even here. Meals to plan with a smaller kitchen and a limited pantry, social considerations with the neighbouring cottages and the people you've seen here in previous summers. You do this lightly, without complaint, because the version of this work that vacation requires is genuinely lighter than the year-round version. What the vacation gives you, in the end, is a change of context for things that remain essentially the same: the care for your family, the management of daily life, the particular attention you bring to whatever room you're inhabiting. But the change of context is itself restorative in ways that are difficult to account for and easy to feel. The light is different. The air is different. Your children are sunburned and sandy and happy in a specific summer way, and you sit on the porch in the long evening light and watch them. And something in you, some tightly held thing, loosens just slightly, just enough. Every other Tuesday afternoon, the bridge table is set up in the sitting room, and 4 women who have been playing together long enough to know each other's tell settle in for 2 hours of cards and everything that surrounds them. Bridge in the 1950s was a serious game, particularly among women who've been playing it since college, and the competition at your table is real. Conducted with smiles and the occasional cutting observation, delivered in a tone of perfect pleasantness. You shuffle the deck with a practiced ease and deal while the conversation moves through its familiar channels: neighbourhood news, children, an upcoming event, the gentle ongoing performance of women who know each other very well and have agreed collectively and without ever saying so to keep things civil. The table itself is the small folding one that lives in the hall closet and comes out for this purpose only, covered with the green baize cloth that you bought specifically for it, because a bridge table without a proper cloth is a thing you have never been able to take seriously. The chairs are pulled from different rooms, a small quarterly migration of furniture that the house accommodates without complaint. By the time the first guest arrives, everything is arranged, the score pads and the sharpened pencils at each place, the small dishes of salted nuts set out because bridge and salted nuts have been companions for as long as you can remember, and you see no reason to break with tradition. They arrive together, the 3 of them, which is the way it usually goes, 2 of them having collected the 3rd on the way over. There is a brief flurry of coats and greetings and the particular animation of women released from their households into each other's company, and then you're all seated and the cards are cut and the afternoon begins in earnest. Bridge is a game that rewards the kind of intelligence that the 1950s had very few other outlets for, at least among women of your circle. The ability to hold a complex system of information in your mind, to reason forward from incomplete evidence, to read your partner's intentions from the bid she makes and the ones she does not, to maintain composure when the hand goes wrong and discipline when it goes right. You have always been good at this, better than you let on in the early years of your marriage when you understood instinctively that being too obviously good at something competitive was a social liability for a woman in certain rooms. You have since found a better calibration. The woman across from you is your usual partner, a friendship of 12 years compressed into a card-playing shorthand, so refined that a glance can communicate what several bids might otherwise require. You know her hesitations and her certainties. You know the slight tightening around her eyes when she's holding something better than she wants the table to know. She knows the same things about you, and the knowledge moves between you during play in a current that the other two can feel but not quite read. This is one of the particular pleasures of a long partnership, the fluency of it, the ease of being fully understood within a specific context. The conversation between hands has its own rhythm, touching on the surface of things and occasionally going deeper, in the way that women's conversation does when the setting is right. Someone's daughter has news. Someone's husband has been travelling more than expected. There's development in the neighbourhood that has produced a range of opinions, expressed here with more candour than they would be in a larger gathering. You contribute and listen in equal measure and hold, as you always do in this company, the slight awareness of what is being said and what is being carefully not said, which are often the more interesting parts of any conversation. The game itself produces its small dramas, a bid that surprises everyone, including the bidder. A hand played perfectly that still goes down because the cards sit the wrong way. A slam made against the odds that causes the winning partnership to accept congratulations with a modesty that fools nobody. You win more than you lose, which is a fact you have made peace with, and your partner squeezes your hand briefly when the afternoon's final tally is written down, a gesture that contains a whole friendship in it. Tea is brought in at 4:30, the way it always is, the same tray with the same pot and the same small plate of shortbread that has become, over years of these afternoons, as much a part of the ritual as the cards themselves. The game is set aside and the conversation expands into the easier register that follows competition, a warmth that the playing produces and that the tea sustains. These women know you in a specific and useful way, not as your husband's wife or your children's mother or the woman who gives the best dinner parties on the street, though they know you as all of those things too. They know you as someone who thinks clearly under pressure and plays her hand with conviction and accepts losing without drama. These are things that matter in a world that didn't always provide women with many arenas in which such qualities could be demonstrated. By 5 o'clock, the table is folded back into the closet and the chairs have been returned to their rooms and the last coat has gone out the door. The house is quiet again. You gather the score pads and put them in the drawer, and you allow yourself, briefly, the satisfaction of an afternoon well played. There exists, in the glossy pages of the women's magazines of the 1950s, a particular vision of the wealthy housewife at home. She is poised, she is smiling. Her kitchen gleams. Her children are spotless. Her hair has not moved since she woke up. She manages the household with effortless grace, and she does it all looking as though she stepped out of a photograph which, in those magazines, she had. You know this woman. You've been working toward her in some sense for as long as you can remember, but the real morning, the actual Tuesday in January with a child home sick and the cleaning woman called away and a dinner still to plan, that morning belongs to a different story, one that the magazines never quite got around to telling. Your daughter woke at 6 with a fever, which you confirmed with the back of your hand before the thermometer had finished its work, because you have been reading fevers for long enough to trust your palm. She's installed now on the sofa under the good blanket, an arrangement you made with quiet efficiency while she looked at you with a particular combination of misery and relief that sick children wear when they understand they will be looked after. The thermometer confirmed what you already knew. You telephoned the paediatrician before 8. The housekeeper called at 8:15 to tell you she would not be in today, her tone carrying the apology of someone who has picked a genuinely bad morning for an absence. You noted this without outward reaction, because outward reaction in these moments accomplishes nothing. You adjusted the day's plan in the time it took to set the telephone back in its cradle. The dinner you were planning requires a trip to the butcher that will not now happen. You work with what the pantry offers instead, moving through the kitchen with the particular resourcefulness of someone who has been feeding a family long enough to know that a good meal does not always require a planned one. The soup goes on before 9, because soup is what the sick morning calls for, and because a pot of something warm on the stove is its own form of reassurance for a child on a sofa and a mother working in the kitchen beyond the doorway. The magazine woman would not have soup on the stove by 9, because the magazine woman would not have a sick child and an absent housekeeper on the same morning. Her mornings are composed and sequential. They have the quality of a stage set, everything in its place, every element chosen and lit to produce a specific impression. You looked at those photographs for years with a combination of genuine aspiration and a suspicion you did not always allow yourself to articulate, the sense that the woman in them was managing a morning that had been cleared of everything real. Your morning has not been cleared of anything. Your daughter is asking for water. The soup needs stirring. The telephone is ringing with a call you'd forgotten about from the committee, which you handle standing at the kitchen counter with one eye on the stove and one ear toward the living room where your daughter has gone quiet in a way that requires checking. You check. She is asleep, the fever doing what fevers do in the first hours, settling the body into the rest it needs. You smooth the blanket over her shoulder and return to the kitchen. By noon the soup is ready, and the committee call has been handled, and the dinner has been reconsidered, and the day has assumed the shape that days assume when they go differently than planned. Functional, a little improvised, held together by the habits and competences that years of managing a household produce without your quite noticing their accumulation. You sit at the kitchen table with your own bowl of soup and the quiet of a house that has found its midday equilibrium. Your daughter sleeping in the next room, the pot still warm on the stove, the light outside flat and grey in the way of January. The magazine morning is beautiful. This morning is real. And you have long understood in the deepest practical part of yourself that real is the more demanding standard, and the more important one. The telephone sits on the small table in the hallway, and it rings throughout the day with a frequency that would surprise anyone who imagined a wealthy housewife's morning as a quiet one. The telephone was the connective tissue of a certain kind of 1950s social life, the instrument through which luncheons were arranged and cancelled and rearranged, through which news travelled at the speed of conversation, through which the whole warm, complicated web of female friendship was maintained across the distances of a spread-out suburb. You pick it up, and the voice on the other end is someone you have known for 15 years, and the conversation begins with something practical and moves, as such conversations always do, into something more. The table where it sits was chosen for this purpose, the right height for standing, with a small drawer for the notepad and pencil that the telephone requires. You've trained yourself over years to always have the notepad open when you answer, because conversations on the telephone in a 1950s household produce a continuous stream of information requiring documentation, a date to write down, a name to remember, an address for a delivery, a reminder to pass to your husband. The notepad fills at a rate that would surprise someone who had never observed it, and you tear off the pages as they fill and distribute them to the appropriate places in the household, the kitchen, the social calendar, your husband's desk. The first call this morning came before 9, which is early but not unprecedented. A friend with a question about the upcoming committee event that could have waited but that she preferred not to let wait, because that is her nature, and you have long since made your peace with it. The conversation is brief and useful, and ends with something confirmed. You make a note and replace the receiver and return to what you were doing. The second call is longer, a friend with news of a kind that requires sitting down, which you do, pulling the small chair from beneath the hall table and settling in for the conversation that the news demands. This is one of the telephone's other functions, the one that no one lists when they explain the instrument's practical uses, the function of being the medium through which the real events of women's lives are communicated and processed. Births and illnesses and marriages and the quieter developments that have no single name but that matter enormously to the people they concern. You listen the way you listen when it counts, without interruption, without the part of your mind that is usually managing something else. By noon, the telephone has rung 4 more times, a call from the school about a scheduling change, your husband calling from the office with a brief, specific question about an evening commitment, a neighbour about a household matter requiring coordination, a call for your daughter from a school friend, handled by your daughter herself under your loose supervision, because the telephone is something children in your household are learning to use with the same correctness they are learning to bring to everything else. There is a particular art to the telephone manner that the decade took seriously, and that you have always understood as a form of courtesy extended through an instrument rather than in person. Your voice on the telephone is warm and unhurried regardless of what else you're managing, because the person on the other end deserves your full attention and deserves to feel that they have it. You do not cut calls short in ways that feel abrupt. You do not allow distraction to travel through the wire. These are small disciplines that cost very little and produce, over years of consistent practice, a reputation for being someone people are glad to have called. The last call of the afternoon is from an old friend, someone from before your marriage whose life has taken a different shape than yours, but with whom you have maintained a friendship that the telephone sustains across the distance between you. These calls are less frequent and more valued. The conversation moves through the practical and into the personal, and eventually into the kind of honest exchange that only a friendship of long standing permits, the kind where you say things you would not say in a room full of other people, and the saying of them clarifies something that needed clarifying. You replace the receiver in the early evening and stand for a moment in the hallway, before the dinner hour reasserts its claim. The notepad is full. The day has been communicated across more distances than you have counted, and the web holds. It is late. The children are asleep. Your husband is reading in the study. The house is quiet in the particular way that a house is quiet only after everyone in it has settled. A living silence full of the sounds of people at rest. You sit in the chair by the bedroom window with your book open in your lap, but you're not reading. You're simply existing, which is something you do not do with much frequency during the daylight hours. The day is reviewed in the quiet of your own mind, not obsessively, not unhappily, but the way a person reviews a long piece of work they have been doing for some time, noting what went well, what will need attending to tomorrow, what surprised you. This is your hour, the one that belongs to no schedule. The bedroom at this time of night has a quality that the daytime version does not. The lamps are low and the curtains are drawn against the dark outside, and the room has contracted around you in a comfortable way, become smaller and more yours than it is during the hours when it serves its other purposes. The chair you're sitting in is the one you chose when you furnished this room, the one with the wide arms and the high back that you argued for against your husband's mild preference for something more streamlined, and you have sat in it at the end of enough days to feel that you were right, which is a small private satisfaction that has accumulated across years of this particular chair. The book in your lap is one you have been reading for 2 weeks in the way that you read during the busiest periods, 10 pages here, 15 there, the thread of it maintained across interruptions with a determination that is its own small discipline. Tonight you do not return to it immediately. You let the quiet of the room settle around you first, let the residue of the day dissolve at its own pace, which is slower than the pace your daytime self operates at and which you have learned across years of these late evenings to allow. The sounds of the house at this hour are specific and familiar. The settling of the structure, the small sounds that old houses make when the temperature drops and the wood contracts slightly, the distant sound of your husband turning a page in the study, a sound you know so well you could identify anywhere. The refrigerator in the kitchen below, cycling on and then off, a sound so habitual it registers only in its cessation. These sounds are the texture of your life at its quietest, and there are evenings when you are aware of them with a gratitude that catches you slightly off guard. You think, in this chair, about things that the daytime does not leave room for. Not the practical things, those have their own time and their own compartments in the mind, but the longer thoughts, the ones about your children and who they are becoming, the one about your marriage and the particular weather of its current season, the ones about yourself that the decades of womanhood in this era did not often invite a woman to think in any public way. Here, in this chair, with the house settled around you, and no one requiring anything of you for the next several hours, you think them freely. It is not loneliness that lives in these late hours, though you have read enough and known enough women to understand that for some it is. For you it is closer to the opposite, a fullness of self that the crowded daytime cannot quite accommodate. The woman in this chair at 11 o'clock is not performing anything for anyone. She's not the hostess or the mother or the committee member or the socially composed figure moving through the public spaces of her life. She's something quieter and more complete than any of those things, and the chair by the window is where she lives most honestly. Eventually you open the book and read, and the story takes you somewhere entirely different from this room and this life, which is what stories are for. The lamp makes its warm circle. The house breathes around you. By midnight you are ready for sleep in the genuine sense, not the obligatory sense of a schedule that requires it, but the organic sense of a body and mind that have worked their full measure and are ready now to rest. You close the book on your page, you turn off the lamp, and the day, which has been yours to manage from the first light, releases you at last into the dark. There is something that takes a long time to see clearly, even from the inside, and it is this: the life of a wealthy housewife in 1950s America, for all its comfort and its genuine pleasures, and the real pride that came with running a household well, carried a quiet weight that the era had no very good language for. You were educated, perhaps, more than the work required. You were capable of things that the structure of your life did not ask you to do. The intelligence and the ambition and the restlessness that might, in another decade, have found other outlets, were channeled here into the dinner party and the committee work and the garden and the children, and some days that felt exactly right, and some days it felt like something else entirely, something you sat within the chair by the window at night and could not quite name. The decade was not without its consolations, and you have never been a person given to self-pity, which is itself a quality the era cultivated in women, with a thoroughness that you only began to examine from a distance. You were told, in 100 different registers, and by 100 different sources, that your life was full, that your role was essential, that the household you managed was the foundation on which everything else rested. And it was true. You believed it in the mornings when the table was set and the children went to school with their lunches made and their clothes pressed. You believed it on the evenings when a dinner party went exactly right and the room held the particular warmth of people well fed and well seated and genuinely glad to be there. But there were other hours, the hours when your children did not need you and the house was already in order, and the calendar held nothing until 3, and the morning stretched ahead with a quality that felt less like freedom than like a room with no particular purpose. You filled these hours because you were someone who filled hours with the garden or a letter or the book you'd been meaning to read, but the filling sometimes had a slightly effortful quality that the magazine version of your life did not acknowledge. The magazine version was never without something meaningful to do. You were, occasionally, and the occasional absence of meaningful occupation was its own quiet discomfort. There were the conversations you could not fully have. Not with your husband, whose world operated on different tracks and who was, in any case, not home during the hours when the discomfort was most present. Not with most of your friends, whose lives mirrored yours closely enough that raising certain questions would have felt like a criticism of something they had also chosen and were also committed to maintaining. The bridge table permitted a kind of honesty that the dinner party did not, but even there certain things remained unsaid, floating in the space between hands, acknowledged by the quality of a glance and then let go. You read, in this decade, certain books that other women were also reading, books that circled around the edges of what you were feeling without quite landing on it, and you felt in reading them a recognition that was also a relief, the sense of being seen in a way that the social world did not often provide. You did not discuss these books at the country club. You discussed them in quieter contexts, with the one or two women in your life whose company could hold the weight of an honest thought without flinching. The cost of the gleaming surface was the continuous labour required to maintain it, not the physical labour, which was real but manageable, but the psychological labour of presentation, the ongoing performance of contentment in a role that was genuinely meaningful, and also, on certain days, genuinely insufficient. You managed this the way you managed most things, competently and without drama, but the management itself was a form of work that went entirely unrecognised because it was invisible by definition. What the era did not yet have words for, or not the right words, was the particular loneliness of a life organised almost entirely around other people's needs, conducted with warmth and genuine care, and still capable of producing, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, the feeling of standing slightly outside your own existence, watching it from a distance, wondering if the woman inside it was fully inhabited or only very well presented. You were, most days, fully inhabited, but the wondering was real, and the not having anywhere to put it was real. And now, at a distance that only time provides, it is worth saying plainly that the women who ran these households and raised these children and set these tables and sat on these committees were more than what the era asked of them, and most of them knew it, and very few of them were ever asked directly what that knowledge cost. The house gleamed, the dinners were beautiful, and somewhere beneath it all, in the chair by the window in the late evenings, a woman who was capable of more than anyone fully asked her sat quietly with that knowledge, and made her peace with it as best she could, as women in every era have always done. So tonight, as your own day settles around you, and the last of its demands release their hold, take a moment to think about the women we walked with today, the ones who rose before the house stirred, and set the breakfast table and managed the week's meals from a tin box full of handwritten cards, the ones who drove to the butcher and waited in the salon chair and sat in committee meetings, where no one recorded their names, but where real things were accomplished by real intelligence, applied with genuine care. They did not think of themselves as remarkable. They were simply doing what the day asked of them, and doing it as well as they knew how. There was beauty in that. Not the airbrushed beauty of the magazine page, but the quieter kind, the beauty of a life tended with attention, of a table set for people you love, of a garden that blooms because someone decided, season after season, to learn what it needed. If this world has left you with anything, let it be permission to slow down a little, to notice the small ceremony in an ordinary morning, to take your time with something that deserves it. The women of this era understood, in a way the modern world has made harder to hold on to, that the quality of daily life is built from small things done with care, and that those small things are not beneath notice. They are, in fact, the whole of it. So pull your blanket a little closer now. Let the day go the way those long afternoons eventually went, quietly, without ceremony, leaving only the warmth of having passed through them. The coffee was good this morning. Someone set the table before you came downstairs, and somewhere in that ordinary fact there has always been enough grace to carry you towards sleep. Good night.